Reflecting on everything, it's tough to pinpoint the exact moment I sensed something was wrong with Tessa. It wasn't as if she transformed into a completely different person overnight. Instead, it felt more like a series of subtle shifts, tiny fractures appearing in the illusion of our seemingly perfect life. Initially, I told myself it was just a phase. Everyone goes through ups and downs, right? But gradually, those small issues piled up until they became too significant to overlook. Tessa used to be the last one to get out of bed, usually dragging herself out around noon on weekends. Now, she's up before dawn, slipping out from under the covers as quietly as a whisper. I'd wake to the sound of the bathroom door clicking shut, only to find her at the mirror, applying makeup as if she were preparing for a fashion show. She never cared much about that stuff before. Not to this extent, anyway. And it wasn't just about the makeup. Suddenly, her closet was overflowing with designer outfits. She claimed they were on clearance or from some sample sale. I wanted to believe her. I really did, at least in the beginning. But the way she carried herself, the way she wore those new clothes with an almost smug smile, it just didn't sit well with me. Then there was the intimacy, or rather, the stark absence of it. I recall coming home after a grueling day, longing to hold her and feel that connection. Instead, there she was, sprawled on the couch, engrossed in her phone. I approached her from behind and wrapped my arms around her waist. "Not now," she replied, brushing me off as if I were an inconvenience. That wasn't an isolated incident. It became a pattern, excuse after excuse.
"I'm tired."
"It's been a long day. Maybe later," but later never arrived. I tried not to dwell on it, but every time she pulled away, it felt like another knife to my gut. That's when the gifts started appearing. Odd little things that felt out of place in our lives. One evening, I found a bottle of fancy wine on the counter. I assumed she bought it for a special occasion, but when I asked, she simply shrugged it off. "Oh, it was from work. Just a little bonus." Then there were lavender-scented candles, which I knew she despised, and a sleek new bracelet adorned with a small charm. I couldn't shake the thought of that bracelet. I had seen something disturbingly similar on the wrist of Derek Thompson's secretary at a work event. I didn't mention it back then, but that thought burrowed into my mind, becoming impossible to ignore. Evenings that once felt sacred turned into a shadow of their former selves. We used to cook together, share meals at the table, and discuss our days. Now, Tessa either dined alone or ordered takeout. One night, she waltzed in well after dinner. I had been waiting at the kitchen table, but she barely acknowledged me. "Derek kept me late," she explained, kicking off her heels without a second thought. The way she uttered his name sent a shiver down my spine. The phone became another alarming sign. She had always been pretty casual about it, leaving it around the house without a second thought. Lately, though, it seemed like an extension of her hand. She wouldn't even leave it on the coffee table when she went to the bathroom. Once, I caught a glimpse of her screen, just long enough to see a flood of heart emojis, but she locked it so quickly that I questioned whether I had truly seen it. When I asked her about it, she just laughed it off. "It's nothing, just Fiona being silly." But the way she avoided my gaze revealed that it was anything but harmless. At first, I didn't know how to handle my suspicions. I wasn't the kind of guy to jump to conclusions, and the last thing I wanted was to ignite a fight over something that might just be my imagination. So I turned to Max, my best friend. We grabbed a few beers at our usual haunt, and I laid everything out for him. "Man, I think you're overthinking this," Max replied, reclining in his chair. "She's always been honest with you. Maybe she's just stressed from work." His words should have brought me comfort, but instead, they deepened my unease. Max didn't see what I saw. He didn't feel the distance widening between us, like a canyon that grew deeper with each passing day. The tipping point arrived one evening when Tessa mentioned she was meeting up with her friend Fiona. Something about the way she said it felt wrong, too casual, too rehearsed. After she left, I decided to call Fiona myself. "Hey, it's Liam. Just wanted to check if Tessa made it to you okay." There was a pause on the other end before Fiona responded awkwardly. Yeah, we met. But that was last week. Not tonight." I hung up, silence enveloping me. My chest felt as if it were filled with concrete. In that moment, I understood that I wasn't imagining things. Tessa was lying to me. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to think, to digest the chaotic reality of my life. Instead, I suggested we attend the upcoming corporate party together, hoping it might provide some clarity, or at least confirm my worst fears. But Tessa's reaction threw me for a loop. "Are you sure you want to go?" she asked, her tone unnaturally light. "It's not mandatory or anything." It was subtle, but the hesitation in her voice spoke volumes. She didn't want me there. And the question that plagued me wasn't just about the party. It was about the state of our relationship. What else had she been concealing? Finally, the night of the corporate party arrived, and I had a gut feeling that something was about to unfold. Tessa had been in the bathroom for nearly 2 hours, longer than I had ever seen her take to get ready. When she finally emerged, I hardly recognized her. She wore a sleek, black dress that hugged her figure in a way that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just sexy. It was a statement. Screamed, "Look at me." "New dress?" I inquired, trying to keep my tone neutral. She smiled, avoiding eye contact, as she brushed past me to grab her purse. "Got it on sale." That was her go-to line lately, anytime something new appeared. A bracelet here, a pair of heels there. But this wasn't just a dress from a sale. It felt chosen for someone, and I was certain that someone wasn't me. A knot formed in my stomach, tightening as we drove to the event in silence. Meanwhile, Tessa appeared calm, even excited, tapping her nails against the window in rhythm with the music. When we pulled up to the venue, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I watched Tessa immediately gravitate toward Derek. I should have seen it coming, but it still hit me like a gut punch. There she was, standing just a bit too close to him, laughing at all of his lame jokes. Jokes that were so absurd even he didn't seem to find them funny. Derek had this magnetic charm, all arrogance and bravado, wrapped up in an expensive suit. He casually placed his hand on her shoulder, and the way it lingered ignited a fire of rage within me. I attempted to stay composed, mingling with other colleagues, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. No matter where I went, she was right there beside him, sipping her wine and hanging on his every word. At one point, I leaned in, desperate to break their little bubble. "You look fantastic tonight," I whispered, searching for any hint of connection. Tessa offered a brief smile, but her gaze flicked back to Derek almost instantly. "Thanks," she replied, as if she were addressing a mere acquaintance instead of her husband. The tension coiled around me like a noose, tightening with every passing moment. I excused myself to the bar, craving a drink to dull the growing ache in my chest. As I stood there, nursing my whiskey, I saw them slip away into a side hallway. Tessa mentioned something about checking the stage for the performance. But I knew better. This was about something far more sinister. I can't explain what compelled me to follow them, but before I fully grasped my own decision, I found myself moving, quietly, deliberately, down the hallway. My heart raced in my chest, pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat, but I didn't care. I needed to uncover the truth. The corridor was dimly lit, and their voices echoed softly ahead of me, guiding me toward a closed door. I pressed my ear against it, straining to hear what was happening inside. "You shouldn't," I heard Tessa's voice say, light and teasing. Derek's low chuckle followed. "You always say that." Then came the unmistakable sound of lips meeting, soft, wet, and deliberate. My fists clenched so tightly that my nails bit into my palms, drawing blood. I stood there, frozen, as the wave of betrayal crashed over me. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone and snapped a few photos through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. It wasn't much, just enough to capture their silhouettes and the closeness between them. Enough to confirm everything I had feared. I lingered for just a moment longer, listening to their muffled laughter before slipping away quietly. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to walk. One step, then another, until I was back in the chaotic main hall. The noise, the music, the chatter, they all felt distant, like I was wandering through a dream. Tessa returned to my side a few minutes later, her cheeks flushed and her lipstick slightly smudged. She flashed me a quick smile, as if nothing was amiss. "Where'd you go?" she asked, reaching for her drink. I shrugged, keeping my tone steady. "Just needed some fresh air." She seemed content with that explanation, blissfully unaware that the air between us had become suffocating. The ride home was steeped in an oppressive silence. Tessa was uncharacteristically cheerful for someone who had just spent the evening with her husband. She hummed along to the radio, her fingers tapping on the steering wheel. I sat beside her, my phone clutched tightly in my pocket, the photos still vivid in my mind. "So, did you enjoy the party?" she asked, glancing at me with a smile that felt utterly insincere. I stared out the window, my jaw clenched tight. It was interesting to observe some people. Her smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. Deep down, I think she knew. Somewhere inside her, she understood that the facade had crumbled. But neither of us spoke another word. We drove through the night in silence, the weight of everything unvoiced pressing down on us. When we finally pulled into the driveway, she leaned over and placed a kiss on my cheek. A hollow gesture, devoid of any real warmth. "Good night," she whispered, slipping out of the car and heading inside. I lingered for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. There was no turning back now. The cracks in our facade had shattered, leaving only the stark truth, cold, harsh, and unyielding. And I refused to let her get away with this. The day after the party found me in the kitchen, nursing my coffee and staring at my phone screen. The damning photos of Tessa and Derek still sat there, unquestionable evidence of her betrayal. I should have felt anger or devastation, but instead, I felt a deep emptiness, as if something fundamental inside me had broken beyond repair. That's when a thought struck me. Not something I had consciously planned, but rather a spark igniting amidst the wreckage. Zoe, Tessa's younger sister. Zoe was spirited and untamed. Everything Tessa had long abandoned. We'd always had a good rapport, sometimes bordering on too friendly. I recalled how she would catch my eye at family gatherings, her gaze lingering just a second longer, her smile hinting at something unspoken. Back then, I dismissed it as innocent fun. But now, it felt like a tantalizing opportunity. I sent her a text. "Hey, do you want to grab coffee sometime? Could use some good company." She replied almost immediately. "Sure, tomorrow, my treat." The next afternoon, I met her at a quaint cafe downtown. She arrived dressed in a snug red sweater that accentuated her curves, paired with jeans that flaunted her legs. Her blonde hair was styled in a messy bun, and the moment she spotted me, her face lit up with that playful, flirty smile that felt like a breath of fresh air. "Look at you," she exclaimed, leaning in for a hug that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "It's been too long, Liam. You look great." "Thanks," I said, feeling her warmth as we stood close. "You look great too." After grabbing our drinks, we settled into a snug corner booth. The conversation flowed too easily, honestly, like a breath of fresh air I hadn't realized I needed. Zoe was charming and witty, but most importantly, she was genuinely interested in me. Her compliments reminded me of the man I used to be before everything with Tessa began to fall apart. "Honestly," she leaned in, her eyes sparkling, "I've always thought you deserved so much more than what Tessa gives you. I should have put a stop to it right then. I should have changed the subject or steered us away from such dangerous territory. But instead, I let her words wash over me like a comforting blanket, easing the ache that Tessa had left behind. As our coffee cups emptied, neither of us seemed ready to say goodbye. Zoe suggested we grab dinner, and I didn't hesitate for a moment. One meal turned into 2 glasses of wine, and before I knew it, we were back on my couch, the space between us vanishing with every passing second. "This is nice," she said softly, her hand brushing against mine. "I really enjoy being here with you." I knew where this was leading, and for once, I didn't care about the consequences. I leaned in, and she met me halfway, our lips touching. That night, we didn't talk about Tessa or Derek or anything that could disrupt our moment. It was just Zoe and me, entwined in the sheets, lost in a world that felt like freedom. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds as I lay beside her, gazing at the ceiling. I was fully aware that what we'd done was wrong, but I had no regrets. Not a single one. Zoe stirred beside me, stretching like a lazy cat before turning to face me. "Morning," she murmured, a sleepy smile gracing her lips. "Morning," I replied, brushing a stray hair from her face. We didn't delve into what this meant or what would come next. We didn't need to. We both understood that this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Zoe and I settled into a thrilling but precarious routine. We began meeting on weekends under the guise of catching up. But there was nothing innocent about the way she gazed at me or how her fingers lingered on mine during dinner. Our affair became a secret refuge, a space where Tessa didn't exist, and her betrayal held no weight. Zoe and I exchanged messages that dripped with intimacy, filled with promises and flirtatious innuendos. Each time I saved one of her photos on my phone, I made sure it was visible. A part of me wanted Tessa to find them. Honestly, part of me dared her to. It didn't take long before Zoe and I began taking photos together. Images of us cuddled on the couch, her head resting on my chest, our hands intertwined. I intentionally left those pictures on my phone, fully aware that Tessa had a knack for snooping. It was only a matter of time before she stumbled across them, and I couldn't wait to see her face when she did. Every time Zoe came over, it felt like I was reclaiming parts of myself that Tessa had stripped away. We laughed, sipped wine, and made love with a wild abandon I hadn't felt in years. With Zoe, I didn't have to maintain the pretense that everything was fine. I could just be angry, bitter, fulfilled, whatever the moment called for. I knew I was playing with fire, but at this point I didn't care if it all went up in flames. The life I once shared with Tessa was already in ruins. If I was destined to burn, I would gladly take her down with me. This wasn't merely an affair. It was revenge, and it felt exhilarating. I knew it was inevitable. Deep down, I wanted it to happen. The thrill of maintaining a secret can only last so long before it erupts, loud and chaotic. That's exactly what transpired one morning in a way that felt almost too perfect. I had left my phone carelessly on the kitchen table, a rare lapse in judgment, or perhaps not so rare. Maybe a part of me wanted her to discover it. Tessa was bustling around the kitchen, pouring herself coffee as if everything between us was still normal. I sat at the counter, pretending to be engrossed in an article on my laptop, while her eyes kept darting toward my phone. And then it buzzed. I didn't even glance at it. I knew who it was. Zoe. I could recite the message from memory. "Can't wait for tonight." I watched as Tessa's hand froze mid-pour, her body going tense. Her gaze snapped to my phone. I caught her from the corner of my eye as she set her coffee down, reached for my phone, and unlocked it with a swipe, like she had any right to do that. The silence in the room became suffocating. Her breathing grew shallow as she scrolled through the thread of messages, each one a sharp dagger piercing the illusion of control she thought she had. There were photos of Zoe and me, grinning in my apartment, her head resting against my chest. There were intimate messages, some playful, some explicit. It was all laid bare before her. She slammed the phone down on the counter with such force that I thought it might break. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "With my sister? Are you fucking kidding me, Liam?" I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply leaned back in my chair, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "And how could you?" I retorted, meeting her furious gaze. "Betray me with Derek?" For a fleeting moment, the fury evaporated from her expression, replaced by something resembling guilt. But just as quickly, her anger returned, though it felt less intense this time. It had morphed into something defensive, desperate. "That was a mistake," she shot back. "I got confused." "Confused," I repeated, barely managing to suppress a derisive laugh. "Then how do you explain it lasting for months?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. It was clear I had her cornered, and the satisfaction I felt watching her squirm was more intense than I had expected. Every lie she told, every flimsy excuse, and every time she distanced herself from me. It was all laid bare now, leaving her nowhere to escape. The sharp click of heels on the hardwood floor shattered the tense silence. Zoe strolled into the room, clad in one of those figure-hugging outfits Tessa had always loathed. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, smirking as if she reveled in the unfolding drama. "This is all on you?" Zoe declared, her tone dripping with disdain. "You never appreciated Liam the way he deserved." I watched as the color drained from Tessa's face, the weight of reality crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Tears welled in her eyes, and I could see her whole body shaking as she tried to hold it together. I should have felt sorry for her, but all I felt was a cold satisfaction. "I know I messed up," Tessa murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to lose you, Liam. Please." She reached out to me, her hands shaking as if she believed she could still mend what was already shattered beyond repair. "It's too late for that," I replied, my voice icy, matching the look in my eyes. "You've already lost me." Her knees buckled beneath her, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I stood there, motionless, watching the woman I once loved crumble into a broken heap before me. But the part of me that had cared for her was long gone, burned away by her lies and betrayals. There was no way back. When Tessa suggested we still attend her family's annual dinner, I almost laughed at her desperation. Clinging to the last vestiges of normalcy, as if sharing a meal with her family could erase everything she had done. But I agreed, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I saw the dinner for what it truly was, a stage perfectly set for the grand finale. An opportunity to expose everything right in front of her family, friends, and the people whose opinions mattered most to her. That day, she spent hours getting ready, applying makeup to mask the puffiness around her eyes from the tears shed after our last confrontation. When she finally descended the stairs, she wore a hesitant smile, still clinging to the hope that we could salvage our relationship. "I know things are rough," she said softly, smoothing her dress, "but I really appreciate you coming. It means a lot." I nodded slightly, grabbing the car keys. "Yeah," I muttered, offering no further reassurance. The drive was uneventful, her small talk forced and brittle. I kept my eyes on the road, mentally preparing for the moment when I would drop my bombshell. Tessa kept glancing at me, searching for any sign that I still cared. But that version of me was long gone. The only thing left was the man ready to blow her world apart in the most public way imaginable. Upon arriving at her parents' house, the tension followed us inside like a shadow. Her parents welcomed us warmly, oblivious to the fact that their daughter's marriage was already in ruins. Her mother kissed me on the cheek, and her father clapped a hand on my shoulder. Zoe stood nearby, wearing a knowing smile, as if she was fully aware of my intentions. Dinner began like any other family gathering, filled with conversations about work, vacations, and mundane updates that held no significance for me. Tessa sat stiffly beside me, her smile forced, hands nervously twisting in her lap. Across from us, Zoe sipped her wine, smirking whenever our eyes met. I played along, biding my time. I laughed at her father's cheesy jokes, made polite conversation with her mother, and waited, patiently, for the perfect moment to unleash my truth. That moment arrived midway through the meal. The chatter around the table had subsided into a comfortable lull, everyone absorbed in their food and drinks. I set my fork down, leaned back in my chair, and glanced around the table. "I've been thinking," I began, my tone casual, like I was about to ask someone to pass the salt. "What's harder to forgive? Cheating with your boss or with your sister?" My words hit the table like a thunderclap. Forks clattered against plates, glasses froze mid-sip, and the lively chatter evaporated in an instant. Tessa's face drained of color, her eyes wide with horror. "Liam," she whispered, a warning in her tone, but it was far too late. Her parents exchanged confused glances, her father's brow furrowing in confusion. "What on earth are you talking about?" he asked, shifting his gaze between Tessa and me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen a few times. Then I turned it around, holding it up for everyone to see. The photos were right there, clear as day. Tessa, pressed up against Derek, their faces inches apart, caught in an intimate kiss. A gasp escaped her mother's lips. "Oh my God!" Her father's face contorted in disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as if struggling to process the scene before him. "How could you do this, Tessa?" her mother hissed, her voice quaking with anger. "And with his boss? Have you lost your mind?" Tessa stumbled over her words, trying to explain herself. "It wasn't like that. It was just flirting. It meant nothing." I couldn't hold back a sharp, derisive laugh that sliced through her feeble explanations. "Flirting? That's quite an interesting definition of flirting, don't you think?" Before Tessa could muster a reply, Zoe piped up, swirling her wine as if she were savoring every juicy detail of a soap opera. "And what about my relationship with Liam?" she asked, her voice oozing with false sweetness. "Did that mean nothing to you?" Tessa's head whipped around to face her sister, disbelief and betrayal written all over her face. You little witch," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. Zoe simply shrugged, taking another sip of her wine, looking far too pleased with herself. "Don't act surprised. You didn't want him, so I decided to take my shot. It's that simple." The room erupted in chaos. Tessa's mother screamed, her voice a cacophony of anger and heartbreak. "You've brought disgrace upon this family," she shrieked, her tone shrill with emotion. Tessa's father slammed his fist onto the table, rattling dishes and silverware. "Enough!" he barked, rising abruptly from his chair. He directed an icy glare at Tessa, his face flushed with indignation. "You've embarrassed all of us. I can't believe you would stoop so low, especially with your boss." Tessa was in full meltdown mode now, sobbing uncontrollably as she tried to explain herself, but her words were futile. The damage was irreparable. Her father stormed out of the room, muttering about how she had disgraced the family, while her mother collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands and crying quietly. Zoe leaned back, a smug smile on her lips, thoroughly enjoying the scene. I remained where I was, watching the spectacle unfold with a cold sense of satisfaction. This wasn't merely revenge. It felt like poetic justice. The morning after the calamity at her parents' house, I realized there was no turning back. The fractures in our relationship had splintered into a chaotic mess, and I had no intention of trying to piece them back together. The very next day, I filed for divorce. There were no lengthy discussions, no heartfelt appeals, just a calculated, unyielding decision. Tessa tried her hardest to sway me. She begged, cried, threw tantrums. Everything you could imagine. She would sit at the edge of our bed, tears streaming down her cheeks, pleading, "Please, Liam, we can fix this. I know I messed up, but I'll do anything to make it work." But I was resolute. I wouldn't engage. Most of the time, I wouldn't even look at her. Her desperate words washed over me like rain on a windshield. Innocuous, pointless noise. I made sure to hire the best attorney I could afford. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. I was determined to walk away with everything I could while leaving her with nothing. She had earned that much after what she had done. When the court hearings began, Tessa looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, and desperately clinging to the scraps of dignity she could find. I had all the evidence stacked in my favor. The photos, the texts, the late-night calls, all solid proof of her affair with Derek. The judge needed little persuasion. He ruled overwhelmingly in my favor, awarding me the bulk of our shared assets. Tessa fought hard. Oh, how she fought! But the evidence was louder than her tears. The look on her face when the verdict was rendered was etched in my mind. Sheer disbelief, as if she couldn't grasp that she was losing everything she held dear. As the ink dried on the divorce papers, Derek Thompson, the man for whom she had sacrificed our marriage, began to distance himself from her like the coward I always knew he was. Rumors drifted back to me through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, Derek had hinted that if she stayed at the company, it might not reflect well on his leadership. A polite way of saying she was out of the picture. Without me, her job, or even her reputation, Tessa became a woman adrift. Her friends, most of whom had likely known about her infidelity but never dared to tell me, started to disappear one by one. Even Fiona, her supposed best friend, gently suggested that she keep her distance from the family to avoid further embarrassment. Then there was her mother. The last I heard, they weren't on speaking terms. Something about bringing shame to the family had been the final nail in the coffin. I didn't care enough to inquire further. As for me, I wasted no time severing ties. I moved out of the house we once shared and found a new apartment in the city. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. An oasis free from the ghosts of our failed marriage. Zoe, we kept things going, at least for a while. I won't pretend it was a fairy tale. It was simple, and simple was exactly what I needed. I was well aware that it wouldn't last forever, but for now it was sufficient. We spent our weekends together, went out to bars, and engaged in flirtation as if we were the only two people in existence. She filled the void that Tessa had left, and I felt no guilt about it. Not in the slightest. There were moments when I wondered if Zoe had deeper feelings for me than I did for her, but I didn't dwell on it. I was too busy enjoying my newfound freedom, the absence of deceit and manipulation, and the thrill of living life on my own terms. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Max hosted a party. It was a casual gathering, just close friends, beer, and music. I arrived late, as usual, and spotted him holding court near the kitchen, drink in hand. When he saw me, he grinned and pulled me into a bear hug. "Liam, my man, how's the new life treating you?" I clinked my beer bottle against his. "Better than ever." That night, we found ourselves on the balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Conversations drifted in and out, but I mostly stayed quiet, letting the symphony of voices wash over me. At some point, Max leaned over and nudged my shoulder. "You good?" I smiled, a genuine smile, for the first time in ages. "Yeah," I said, raising my bottle. "I think I am." We toasted to new beginnings, and for the first time in a long while, I felt unburdened, like the weight of everything had finally lifted. The past was behind me, and as I sat there, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next would be on my terms, and that was all I needed.